This is an RNZ podcast.
You've likely seen the news by now that our company has proposed to shut down Newshub from June. Some people have been asking, does that affect AM too? And AM and Newshub are one and the same. We're all part of the same family. I hope you can hear me in this voice. So yes, that does mean the end of AM too.
You're making us tear up as well.
That's AM host Melissa Chan Green extinguishing the hopes of her audience members at the top of the show on Thursday. Her co-host Lloyd Burr added his own eulogy, though he spiced it up with a small and, to be honest, quite visceral note of hope.
I'm so lucky to work with all of you, with you guys, with the people in the newsroom, including those people who stayed behind after such awful news yesterday. They stayed behind in the newsroom, they put a bulletin out, and they set up this show this morning because we care about what we do and we care about what you watch, and we're just so thankful to have your company. Thank you for your support.
We've always done that. When the chips are down, we get through it. We somehow push through it. And John Campbell once said that we're tighter than a fish's bum.
Oh.
Thanks for that, John Campbell. The revelation that AM would be part of the Newshub shutdown wouldn't have been news to anyone who'd been listening to Heather Duplessis-Allen on News Talk ZB the previous day. She got that fact confirmed directly from the horse's mouth by Warner Brothers Discovery's James Gibbons. And his revelation left her with one burning question.
James, is this just the news, or is it absolutely everything news-related? The AM show, the Ryan Bridge show, Newshub Nation, the lot?
It's all of the in-house news production, that's right.
What are you going to do with all the equipment?
Other potential lines of inquiry include, what are you going to do about all those people who are losing their jobs? And what are we going to do about the loss of media diversity and competition? Journalists, including Newshub's Amelia Wade, did put those sorts of inquiries to the Broadcasting Minister, Melissa Lee. She said, don't worry about it, audiences have still got Sky.
Now they have one choice. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, there's Sky as well. There's a whole lot of other medias about.
Over at Simon Barnett's afternoon show on News Talk ZB, listeners echoed that consolation.
There's no news. I've got BBC and Al Jazeera and CNN and all them. And you get news as it's happening and whatever you want. And you put Channel 3 on, Channel 1 on, and it's Belfast builds new scout hut. You know, and the world is falling to bits in a handcart, and there's nothing ever on that really is news.
Just one problem with all this, though. Sky's news broadcast is supplied by Newshub, which doesn't make it a great alternative to content produced by Newshub. David Seymour, a shareholding minister in TVNZ in this coalition, posited one idea for fixing the paucity of competition in broadcast news: weakening TVNZ's market position.
It may well mean that they have to make a return on equity, just like every other business in New Zealand is required to do.
Sadly, TVNZ's dominance is far from Newshub's only problem. Its demise comes in the context of a global downturn which has decimated the media's ad revenue, much of which had already been hoovered up by tech giants even before the economy went down the gurgler. Newshub is far from alone in suffering in those conditions. Vice, which once boasted its own award-winning New Zealand bureau and a valuation of US $5.7 billion, shut down news operations this week. Legacy outlets such as the Washington Post and the LA Times have been laying off staff, while publications like Sports Illustrated, Business Insider and Pitchfork are shells of their former selves. TVNZ's business correspondent Katie Bradford summarised the dismal economic conditions facing the industry on One News.
People aren't spending as much. We see it, for instance, with advertising revenue falling with Newshub. You know, there is not the demand out there. There's not the consumption out there.
Now, I'm no economist, but forcing TVNZ to return a bigger dividend might not be enough to entice new players into that dire market. On X, formerly Twitter, reality check radio host and social media commentator Chantal Baker skipped over those structural issues to claim Newshub's real problem was that it just wasn't remotely interested in integrity and investigative journalism. Newshub's journalism was pivotal in Taina Porter being freed after being convicted of a murder he didn't commit. It exposed flaws in the investigation into Peter Ellis. It highlighted alleged workplace abuses on offshore fishing vessels, uncovered lax practices in New Zealand's MIQ system, and more recently shone the spotlight on the exploitation of migrant workers.
The men called police after their food ran out and they were forced to turn to begging. Nick Truebridge was there and has this exclusive report.
40 men crammed into a filthy, overcrowded three-bedroom home for months on end, sharing a single shower, cooking over one stove. Not that there's anything to make. They tell us food that was being supplied hasn't come for 3 days.
The journalists who work to break those stories might take some issue with an internet radio host's assertion they're not interested in integrity or investigation. But Baker's tweet is at least indicative of another real problem with the media's business model. Its audiences have migrated online along with its ad revenue, and there they're met with a range of competing news sources, including influencers like Baker or outlets such as the privately bankrolled digital startup The Platform or the Voices for Freedom aligned Reality Check Radio. Some of those outlets and commentators might make spurious claims, like, for instance, that Newshub is shutting down because it isn't interested in integrity or investigative journalism. But they're still finding large audiences thanks to algorithms which prioritise engagement over factual accuracy. Back over at News Talk ZB, Simon Barnett was dealing with the outworkings of that.
We should be getting that off the news, and we don't.
Yeah, but where do you get it from?
People from their region talking about it.
What, on Facebook? Okay.
Well, I've just searched up the story, and there are people that covered it. And matter of fact, the first story that comes up is a Newshub story, and it says Genesis Energy say the opening of the floodgates in the river near Wairoa absolutely did not lead to the flooding.
You believe that? It's fake news.
Even without algorithmic juicing, though, these sometimes less than credible outlets have a big advantage over traditional news organisations which have to pay for journalists, transmission fees, and that aforementioned equipment. Their content is cheap as chips. Stuff's owner Sinead Boucher outlined the traditional media's struggle to compete for advertising and audience eyeballs in the social media age at a select committee hearing last week.
But our ability to continue to do this work is in grave peril. Journalism is in a fight for its life against the most powerful and profitable companies that have ever existed.
At the same committee, RNZ Chief Paul Thompson joined a host of commentators in warning that the media's decay is bad for our democracy.
If we don't tell and own our stories, and if New Zealanders don't have a range of media to come to, public, private, community, commercial, print, digital, radio, TV, if they don't have a range and a choice, they will get the information from somewhere else and it will break our democracy.
On Wednesday, our ability to tell our own stories got a bit weaker. Newshub's journalists have shone a light on some dark corners of society and provided an incisive check on our politicians. They even said so themselves after it was announced the service was shutting down. But it's not necessarily just what's being lost that counts. It's what's taking its place.